Hello, world. This is the Know Your Place podcast. I'm your host, Charles Altendorf. On this week's episode, our 51st episode, blah. Last week was episode 50. This week is 51. I decided to do something fun. Well, I don't know. I wanted to talk about my different grill out or cookout experiences over the years. I've lived in 5 different states, scattered across sort of the eastern half of the United States. So I figured it would be interesting to sort of talk about some of the differences I've noticed. Uh, First of all, I don't know how big the grill out cookout culture is in other countries. I'm assuming other countries do it as well, but it does seem like it's a big part of American culture. During all the sporting events, people sometimes do it. You can see ads for it during sporting events. And if you work somewhere long enough, you're probably going to be invited to one by your coworkers. And or if you're in a church, you're going to be invited to one by your church. So it's a thing here. It's a very popular thing here. But I have noticed, generally speaking, we see some uniform, people. You usually see the stereotypical "don't burn the burgers" or "don't burn the hot dogs," and that is generally what we see across the country. Is sort of summertime grilling in the backyard. But I want to sort of talk about other things I've noticed in sort of different places I've been. So when I was a wee little child, I used to obviously live in Wisconsin, and that is where my relatives are from. So I go back there fairly often. But so my young memories of cookouts as a kid are from Wisconsin or get-togethers for parties. Usually a lot of the time though, my memories are from Christmas time, which you don't really have a grill out in Christmas time in Wisconsin unless you're really tough because it's obviously very cold there. But there are some memories I have of them. And what I find very interesting when I started thinking about the ideas for this episode was most of my memories of having a grill out or a cookout or a party meal with people when I was a kid in Wisconsin, or even when I go back up there, don't they don't serve burgers, which is hilarious because that's not to say in Wisconsin we don't eat or they don't eat burgers. That's absolutely false. People eat tons of burgers in Wisconsin. I mean, I have so many different spots I love the burgers from in Wisconsin, and you've all probably heard me discuss my favorite place, which is Cops in Milwaukee. But there, no, I do remember one time when I was a kid there were burgers when we celebrated my dad's birthday at the beach when I was like 4 years old. But that's it. That's my only. Generally speaking, when you go and have a cookout, I'm used to remembering eating these huge hunkin' brats. Big sausages. I don't know how many of the audience knows this, but Johnsonville brats is actually from Wisconsin, believe it or not. There is a town in Sheboygan County. It's right down the road from where my grandfather lives and where my mother was born, and it's literally called Johnsonville, and they make the brats there. So so I grew. So that's what I grew up there. And then the other thing that was very interesting is the last few times I came back in as an adult, smoked chicken was popular. So my uncle made smoked chicken for me, and another time I was over, my mom's cousin made smoked chicken for us, and then other times I've been at cookouts there, they've been doing fish because I'm sure. Well, I don't know how many people are familiar with Wisconsin. I'm assuming most people are now who've listened to me into 51 episodes. But there's lots of lakes in Wisconsin. There's lots of fish, so people eat a lot of fish, and they either boil it or grill it or whatever. So I actually don't have that many memories of going to a grill out in Wisconsin and eating burgers. So there you go. I'm going to rock your world in the first couple minutes into my podcast. So yeah, so in Wisconsin, I think the reason why you don't see burgers a ton at grill outs in Wisconsin is because it's just like an everyday food. You don't do that special for your friends in Wisconsin. You don't say, "Hey, come on over, Jim. We're having burgers today." You know that you just don't do that because that's like something we eat for lunch, man. so anyway, so the next place I'm going to sort of talk about is when I was younger, when I was about elementary school, middle school age for a little while. Well, end of elementary school and then middle school, we lived in North Carolina. And North Carolina was a big cultural adjustment for me from Wisconsin, mainly on the weather front, but just in general, it was also a place where we lived in particular, living in the greater Raleigh area. It was a very fast growing place. So there's always a bunch of new people moving in and new cultures intermingling. So it made it kind of, it was different. Not to say there are different cultures intermingling in Wisconsin as well, but Wisconsin was not growing as fast as North Carolina. It just wasn't. So, but when I was there, again, another thing that was very interesting about living there was that generally speaking, at a cookout there, they didn't have burgers either, unless it was. If you really went to one, okay, I'll take that back. If you went to one that was hosted by people who weren't from there, then yeah, there would be burgers. It'd be your standard burger hot dog fare. But we managed to make friends with some people who were native North Carolinians, grew up there their whole life. They know. You go over their house, they're busting out the barbecue competition, man. They're they're gonna smoke their pork for like 6 hours before you come over, and you're gonna decide whose pork is the best, who's got the best sauce, which cut of pork you're supposed to use, and it was crazy. I mean, it was really good. I mean, really tender pork, but they would have one heck of a competition, man. I mean, one time we went over in the park we would frequent there that was just halfway between my middle school and my house. They one weekend just said, "Yeah, we're just gonna have a giant barbecue competition," and we came over and there's like 10 varieties to try, and they're just open to the public. Pay like $5 to get in, and it was great. It was absolutely great. And that I tell you, although I'm a bad North Carolinian because my favorite barbecue place when I lived there was actually a place that did Kansas City style baby back ribs. It was called O'Brien's. And so here we're in North Carolina, sort of like a mega of a certain style of barbecue, and I actually liked another kind of barbecue. And I still like Kansas City style. I would eat when we moved to Kentucky. I would still eat at this chain called Famous Days with my parents all the time, and it's based out of Kansas City as well. So I'm terrible. I shouldn't like that style. I don't know what's wrong with me, but yeah. So when you get invited over for a party, in North Carolina, you better be ready to eat some pork. Okay. If it's real North Carolinians hosting it. And another thing that's interesting to me, that's sort of in North Carolina, I started noticing it a little bit, but I'm going to talk about it more when we start talking about the cookouts or grill outs I go to in Kentucky. But in Wisconsin, there is some starches, but it's a big focus on the meat, some focus on the dessert, and often there is like some attempt at having decent vegetables. But man, when you're in North Carolina, especially when you're in Kentucky, there's just like so many varieties of starches. When I was in college, I go to a bunch of these cookouts with whatever with church groups I was in, and oh my gosh, there would be like 10 varieties of starches. I'd just feel so overwhelmed. I would have they'd make fun of me because I'd eat at these people's house, hang out there, and then I'd just pass out for like half an hour after eating over there. But that's how crazy it was, you know. Anyway, so before I get to Kentucky and my college life at the University of Kentucky and different barbecues I experienced there, I also got to talk about Cincinnati because I went to high school outside of Cincinnati, as you know from my 4th episode. And yeah, the interesting thing about there that I noticed, the cookouts I went to, and I mainly went to ones on the west side. Because my parents' friends were mainly west siders, and if you're from the area, you know what that's about. And if you don't know what that's about, you should listen to my 4th episode, and then you'll know what that's about. But they or I should say, I don't remember which episode it is, if it's 3rd or 4th. I'll have to go look back at my list. But it's called Coming of Age in Cincinnati, so you can listen to that and get an impression. But what I thought was always bizarre was and there was some focus again on the sausage a bit, like in Wisconsin, but there they were really obsessed with deer, with having deer. I guess they all love to hunt deer around there. So every there'd be so many. I just have all these memories of, like, my parents' friends have an annual cookout they do every year now called the Beer and Deer. And there's not only deer and there's not only home brews there, but I mean that was what this all started around. And my parents were part of a German American Heritage Society, and every year it was a big deal that they had this thing they called the venison dinner. And, so I guess people there just love to hunt and eat what they hunt in greater Cincinnati. And it was just crazy. I mean, just because, I don't have any problem with venison. In fact, I like it. I've liked it. I like it pretty well. I can eat it absolutely. But it's just totally weird. Somebody comes up to you like, "Hey man, we're having our venison dinner. Come on over." You don't generally think of that when you see the standardized whitewashed ad for a sporting event that's hosted by Kingsford or somebody. They're not talking about grilling your deer or having uh, they're not talking about having venison stew. That's not what they're talking about when you're having a party with friends over. So it was really interesting. And like I said, I guess the Cincinnati area just really loves to hunt. Not to say they don't in Wisconsin too. I have a great uncle who hunts all the time, but it's just they're really obsessed with showing off their game. Yeah, I remember also, like, one time my dad's one of his bosses like made a point of going up to Michigan and buying like a whole hog or something. They're really obsessed with having meat they're kind of calling vaguely, I don't know how to describe it, vaguely, we'll say sort of like not your typical meat. They're very obsessed with that around there, which is cool. They were kind of like that at some spots in North Carolina too. There was this restaurant we used to go to all the time in North Carolina called Nightdale Seafood and Barbecue, and they would have crazy game. I mean, they'd have like quail and rattlesnake and all kinds of real wild game, you know. But that's sort of different. So anyway, the last place I wanted to talk about, well, to bring it sort of closer to home. So after going to high school in Cincinnati, I went to college in Lexington, Kentucky, home of the University of Kentucky. And yeah, when they would have cookouts there, like I say, it was predominantly burgers, which I found very interesting because when one thinks of Kentucky, one can only help but think of that chain, Kentucky Fried Chicken. Okay, so I'm not saying I was expecting to be invited over somebody's house and eat fried chicken, but that's super rare here. I don't. And I think it's sort of like Wisconsin, and not really going to that many cookouts with burgers is because here in Kentucky we take fried chicken for granted. We just eat it all the time, so it's not something special we bust out for somebody. So but when I would go to these cookouts in college, man, everybody wanted to have burgers. Gotta have the right beef. Who makes the best burgers? I make the best burgers. And it was a lot of fun. It was also really terrible because I remember one time I ate burgers for like 2 days in a row. I think all I ate was like burgers at these cookouts. And every cookout in Kentucky also has to have mac and cheese. That is a requirement. And that I also found kind of interesting. Again, because not to say Kentucky is not what we think of as a traditional cattle state. even though it is officially the largest beef producing state east of the Mississippi now. It's like eighth overall in the United States. So there is a lot of beef around here, good, plentiful beef. And it's reflected in all these cookouts I've been to. But it's funny because you don't think of it as a beef state. You obviously think of like Texas, or you think of even Wisconsin. You would think there'd be more beef, but no. Here, man, everybody wants to have a burger grill out. And hey, it's cool. I am always down to have some burgers with somebody. So yeah, it's and of course they always have 10 different starches, and half the time people are making 3 or 4 different kinds of pies, and by the time you're done with all that, you are so full. And that's probably why Kentucky is 7th in obesity in the United States. um it's but it's great. It's great eating. It's just very filling eating. And I can't tell you the number of times I've had a dinner at a party somewhere in Kentucky and felt like I was going to pass out for a few hours just from the sheer caloric intake. Um, anyway, yeah. So let me know what your favorite grill out experiences are, what they're like in your countries and your places. And keep listening. Uh, it's been really fun doing 51 episodes. Peace.